Florence, a city of art, beauty, and secrets. For centuries, this jewel of Italy was under the thumb of one family, the Medici. They were bankers who became dukes, then grand dukes, and even popes. They built palaces, funded masterpieces, and held sway over empires. But how did they do it? How did they convince everyone they were destined to rule? They put on the greatest shows on earth. Forget quiet backroom deals. The Medici loved a parade. They threw colossal, mind-bending spectacles that transformed the entire city into a living theater. These were not just parties. They were carefully crafted displays of unimaginable wealth, political cunning, and sheer, undeniable power. Let us dive into 10 of their most jaw-dropping public performances. Number 10. The Giostra of Lorenzo de Medici, 1469. The year is 1469. Lorenzo de Medici, known later as the Magnificent, was just 20 years old. He was a rising star in the family, following in the footsteps of his father Piero the Goody, but Florence was a republic, at least on paper. The Medici held power through influence, alliances, and a carefully managed illusion of popular consent. How do you cement the image of a young man destined to lead a powerful family, a city, and a burgeoning empire of culture? You throw a joust. Not just any joust, but a spectacle so grand it would be talked about for generations. The chosen location was the Piazza Santa Croce, a vast open space in the heart of Florence. The wooden stands, draped with rich fabrics and the family's emblems, rose high around the square. Banners, embroidered with gold and silk, fluttered in the breeze. The scent of fresh hay, excited crowds, and expensive perfumes filled the air. This was not a real battle. This was a choreographed ballet of power and artistry. The day began with a grand procession, a parade leading from the Medici Palace to the Piazza Santa Croce. Lorenzo himself was the star, but he was far from alone. He was accompanied by a retinue of young Florentine nobles, all dressed in incredible costumes. Each knight had a personal emblem, a divisa, and a motto, carefully chosen to reflect their character or aspirations. Lorenzo's emblem was a laurel branch, a symbol of victory and poetry. This motto, the temps revient, or time returns, hinted at a new golden age he intended to usher in. His costume was a masterpiece of Renaissance fashion and symbolism. Records describe a velvet cloak adorned with gold embroidery and pearls, shimmering in the sunlight. His armor was polished to a mere sheen, possibly crafted by the finest armorers in Milan. He wore a helmet topped with a huge feathered plume. His horse, a magnificent war horse, was equally bedecked, its trappings woven with silver, and the Medici pale or balls, the family coat of arms. The crowd roared as the procession wound its way through the streets. People craned their necks from windows and balconies, eager to catch a glimpse of the young Medici. The sound of trumpets and drums echoed off the stone buildings. Lorenzo was not just a participant, he was the patron of this entire event, an impresario of entertainment and propaganda. The joust itself featured skilled riders charging at each other, aiming to break lances or unseat their opponents. It was a test of skill, courage, and horsemanship. But for the Medici, it was also a test of their ability to orchestrate public opinion. The prize for the joust was a silver helmet adorned with a figure of Mars, the god of war, a clear nod to the power being displayed. While Giuliano de Medici, Lorenzo's brother, actually won the top prize in a later joust, this 1469 event was all about Lorenzo's debut. He might not have won the actual joust, but he won the hearts and minds of many Florentines that day. The chroniclers of the time emphasized his grace, his elegance, and his apparent ease under the public gaze. The poets like Agnolo Poliziano, whom Lorenzo sponsored, penned verses celebrating his participation, ensuring the event would be remembered as a triumph. The cost of this joust was astronomical. Historians estimate it ran into the thousands of florins, a vast sum that could build a small palace. This lavish spending was not frivolous. It was a calculated investment. It showcased the Medici's limitless wealth, their ability to command the finest artisans and craftsmen, and their dedication to the public good through spectacular entertainment. It also solidified their image as leaders who combined martial prowess with intellectual and artistic sophistication. The Giostra was a living advertisement for the Medici brand, a vivid reminder that Florence thrived under their magnificent patronage. It was a bold statement from a young man stepping into a powerful role, proving he was more than just a banker's son. He was a prince in all but name. Number 9, Cosimo the Elder's return to Florence, 1434. Imagine Florence in 1434. The city was a hotbed of political intrigue, rival families vying for control. The Medici, led by Cosimo de Medici, had risen to immense wealth and influence through banking. But power in a republic was a slippery thing. Cosimo, a master strategist, had been exiled just a year earlier by rival factions, particularly the Albizzi family. It seemed the Medici era might be over. But Cosimo was a shrewd operator, and his allies in the city, along with his vast financial network, quickly worked to undo his banishment. When the time came for his return, it was not a quiet, stealthy affair. It was a calculated, triumphant procession designed to announce, without doubt, that the true ruler of Florence was back. On October 6, 1434, the city gates opened for Cosimo. He did not sneak back in. He arrived in a carriage, surrounded by a throng of supporters. The accounts from the period describe a scene of extraordinary public fervor. The streets were packed with Florentines, shouting and cheering. It was a spontaneous outpouring of relief and joy from many who had missed his steady hand and generous patronage. The bells of the city's churches rang out in celebration, a joyous peal that echoed across the rooftops. As Cosimo made his way through the main thoroughfares, past the Duomo and the Palazzo della Signoria, the city seat of government. The route was not officially decorated with triumphal arches or allegorical floats, as would become common in later Medici processions. This was different. This was a parade of raw popular acclaim, orchestrated by the absence of official impediment rather than overt state sponsorship. The real decorations were the faces of the citizens looking up at him with hope and expectation. He was hailed as the father of the fatherland, a title of profound respect that indicated he was seen as the guardian and benefactor of Florence. This was not a title given lightly in a republic that theoretically prided itself on its liberty. It showed how deeply Cosimo had embedded himself into the city's social and economic fabric. His return marked a definitive shift in Florentine politics. His rivals were now exiled, and Cosimo, though still careful to maintain the appearance of a citizen, effectively became the city's uncrowned king. The chronicler Vespasiano de Bisticci described the scene, noting the immense joy of the people. They saw in Cosimo not just a banker, but a man who understood the city's needs, who provided employment, and who supported the arts and sciences. His exile had caused economic disruption and political instability. His return was a promise of renewed prosperity and peace. The procession was a powerful psychological victory. It was a demonstration that, even without official government backing, Cosimo commanded the loyalty of the populace. He had spent his exile in Venice, continuing his banking operations, and from there he subtly pulled the strings, ensuring his return would be inevitable and, more importantly, welcomed. The sheer force of public opinion channeled into this celebratory entry was a political weapon far more effective than any army. Cosimo's return ushered in an era of unprecedented Medici dominance, stretching for decades. He ruled not through force, but through consent, patronage, and the careful management of public perception. His triumphant re-entry into Florence in 1434 was the first grand procession of the Medici, a template for how they would use public spectacle to assert and celebrate their power for centuries to come. It was a raw, unscripted display of popular affection, a powerful endorsement that transformed a banker into the de facto ruler of one of Europe's most influential cities. Number 8, Lorenzo the Magnificent's Carnival Triumph of Bacchus and Ariadne, 1490. By the late 15th century, Florence under Lorenzo the Magnificent was the dazzling heart of the Renaissance. Lorenzo, Cosimo the Elder's grandson, understood that power wasn't just about money or political alliances. It was also about culture, art, and the spirit of the people. And no time was better for showing off the Medici's cultural dominance than Carnival. Florence's Carnival was legendary, a no-holds-barred celebration before the austerity of Lent. Lorenzo, a poet and patron of the arts, transformed it into an incredible city-wide spectacle. One of his most famous creations was the Triumph of Bacchus and Ariadne, performed in 1490. This was not just a parade, it was a moving mythological tableau, a feast for the eyes and ears, designed to overwhelm the senses and delight the Florentine crowds. The procession took place at night, adding to its mysterious and enchanting quality. Torches cast flickering shadows, illuminating the fantastic creations. The core of the triumph was a series of elaborate floats, known as carry. These were not simple wagons. They were monumental, multi-tiered constructions designed by the greatest artists of the day, including possibly even Botticelli or his associates. They depicted scenes from classical mythology, chosen for their symbolic resonance and visual splendor. The central float for Bacchus and Ariadne was a rolling stage that featured the god of wine, Bacchus, played by a handsome young man, alongside Ariadne, the goddess of fertility and dance. They were surrounded by a merry band of satyrs, nymphs, and revelers. The performers, dressed in incredible costumes, mimed the story of Bacchus finding Ariadne on Naxos. Some were clad in animal skins, their faces painted, embodying the wild, untamed spirit of the god. Others wore flowing robes adorned with garlands of ivy and grapes. The floats were pulled by teams of oxen, their horns adorned with flowers and ribbons. As they moved slowly through the narrow streets of Florence, musicians played lively tunes on lutes, flutes, and drums. The air was filled with the sounds of merriment, the excited chatter of the crowd, and the intoxicating scent of wine and blooming flowers. Lorenzo himself wrote the famous song that accompanied this triumph, known as a canto carnavalesco. Its refrain, "Quanta bella giovanezza, che si fuga tuttavia," how beautiful is youth, which quickly flees, became an iconic piece of Italian poetry. The song urged everyone to enjoy life's pleasures while they lasted, a perfect sentiment for Carnival. It was sung by the performers on the floats and quickly picked up by the crowds, turning the entire city into a singing, dancing chorus. Other floats in the procession might have depicted other mythological scenes or allegories, all crafted with incredible detail. There were possibly floats shaped like enormous beasts, or chariots adorned with golden scales and shimmering fabric. The attention to detail, from the costumes of the smallest attendant to the intricate carvings on the floats, spoke volumes about the resources and artistic talent at the Medici's disposal. The public's reaction was one of awe and exhilaration. This was more than entertainment. It was a communal experience, a shared fantasy brought to life by the Medici. It provided a temporary escape from the everyday, a moment of pure, unadulterated joy. But beneath the revelry, a powerful message was being sent. Lorenzo de Medici was not just a political leader. He was the maestro of Florence's cultural life, the patron who brought beauty and joy to his people. He was the embodiment of the Renaissance spirit, a true magnificent. The triumph of Bacchus and Ariadne and other carnival spectacles were not cheap. They cost vast sums, drawing on the Medici's seemingly endless wealth. But like the jousts, this was an investment in public relations. It demonstrated Lorenzo's generosity, his refined taste, and his unique ability to command and inspire the greatest artists of the age. It cemented the Medici's image as the indispensable patrons of Florence, without whom the city's vibrant cultural life could not exist. This was soft power in its most dazzling form, a captivating performance that bound the Florentine heart to the Medici name. Number 7. Pope Leo X's entry into Florence, 1515. Florence in 1515 was about to witness a procession unlike anything before. Giovanni de Medici, Lorenzo the Magnificent's son, had become Pope Leo X, the first Medici Pope. This was the ultimate triumph for the family, proof that their influence stretched from the banking houses of Florence to the highest echelons of the Catholic Church. When Leo X decided to visit his hometown, the Medici family and the Florentine government spared no expense to make his entry the most magnificent spectacle the city had ever seen. It was not just a papal visit, it was a meticulously planned celebration of Medici ascendancy. The preparations began months in advance. The entire city was transformed into a temporary stage, a vast outdoor art gallery. The route chosen stretched from the Porta San Pier Gattolino, one of the city's southern gates, through the Oltrarno district, across the Ponte Santa Trinita, and culminating at the Duomo. Along this path, a series of 7 triumphal arches and 2 colossal statues were erected, each designed by leading artists of the day, including Jacopo Sansovino and Baccio Bandinelli. Andrea del Sarto, the master painter, contributed paintings to these temporary structures. These arches were not mere decorative elements. They were towering classical structures mimicking ancient Roman triumphs, complete with detailed bas-reliefs and allegorical figures. Each arch had a specific theme, praising Leo X and, by extension, the Medici family. One arch might depict scenes from the Pope's life or his virtues, while another might celebrate the golden age of Florence under Medici rule. The records describe intricate architectural details, painted illusions, and sculptures that seem to defy gravity. The most extraordinary temporary structure was the facade added to the Duomo. The magnificent cathedral of Santa Maria del Fiore, with its iconic dome by Brunelleschi, had an unfinished facade. For Leo X's visit, a temporary wooden facade was constructed, covered with canvases painted by Andrea del Sarto and his workshop. It depicted classical columns, niches with statues and elaborate friezes, transforming the bare brick into a grand classical temple front. This temporary structure was a stunning feat of engineering and artistic illusion, meant to impress the Pope and the thousands who would witness it. On November 30th, 1515, Pope Leo X entered Florence. He rode a magnificent white horse, dressed in opulent papal vestments, sparkling with jewels. He was accompanied by a vast retinue cardinals in their scarlet robes, bishops, abbots, and ambassadors from across Europe, all eager to pay homage to the powerful new pope. The Florentine nobility, dressed in their finest silks and velvets, rode alongside, showcasing their loyalty and the city's wealth. The city gonfalonier, the head of the Florentine government, played a leading role in welcoming the pontiff, reinforcing the official nature of the event. The streets were strewn with flowers and aromatic herbs, and tapestries hung from windows depicting mythological scenes or Medici triumphs. Choirs sang hymns of praise. The air was filled with the acrid scent of gunpowder from cannons firing salutes, the sweet fragrance of incense, and the roar of the crowds. As the procession passed each triumphal arch, musical fanfares sounded, and performers enacted short theatrical pieces bringing the allegories to life. One account mentions a statue of a giant, or possibly a fountain flowing with wine, designed to amaze the onlookers. The sheer scale and cost of the event were staggering. Historians estimate it ran into the hundreds of thousands of florins, a sum so immense it nearly bankrupted the city government. But the Medici considered it a worthwhile investment. It was a tangible demonstration of their power, not just within Florence, but across Europe. Their son was the leader of the Christian world. This procession was a message to all rivals and skeptics. The Medici had arrived at the pinnacle of power, and they intended to stay there. The Florentines themselves witnessed a transformative event. Their city, already renowned for its art, was turned into a living monument to human ingenuity and devotion. The temporary structures were dismantled soon after, but the memory of their grandeur and the symbolic weight of the Pope's visit lingered for years. It solidified the Medici's reputation as patrons of unparalleled vision and as a family blessed by divine favor, having risen from merchants to the highest office in Christendom. Number 6. Entry of Eleonora of Toledo into Florence, 1539. By 1539, Florence had changed dramatically. The Republic was gone. Alessandro de Medici, the first Duke of Florence, had been assassinated. His successor, a young, ambitious man named Cosimo I de Medici, was determined to consolidate his rule and establish a true dynastic lineage. To do this, he needed a powerful alliance and a legitimate heir. His choice was Eleonora of Toledo, the daughter of Don Pedro Alvarez de Toledo, the powerful Spanish viceroy of Naples. Her arrival in Florence was not just a wedding, it was a grand procession designed to introduce the new duchess and solidify Cosimo's nascent ducal court. The marriage itself had taken place quietly in Naples, but the grand entry into Florence was a necessary public declaration. Eleonora arrived on June 29, 1539, accompanied by a magnificent Spanish entourage. This was important. It signaled to the Florentines and to the rest of Europe that Cosimo had secured a powerful foreign alliance, tying his house to the mighty Spanish Habsburg Empire. The city was once again transformed. Her Florentine artists and architects, including Giorgio Vasari, Niccolo Tribolo, and Bartolomeo Alminati, were commissioned to create a series of temporary structures along the processional route. This route typically began at the Porta al Prato, leading through the city to the Palazzo Medici, and then to the Palazzo della Signoria, which Cosimo would soon transform into the Palazzo Vecchio. The temporary architecture was a striking blend of classical and symbolic elements. Triumphal arches, reminiscent of ancient Rome, were erected, adorned with allegorical figures, paintings, and inscriptions. These depicted themes of peace, prosperity, and the virtues of the new ducal couple. For example, one arch might show Florence flourishing under Cosimo's rule, while another celebrated the union of the Medici and Toledo families. Paintings on canvas, depicting scenes from mythology or history, adorned many of the buildings along the route. Eleonora herself was the center of attention. Records describe her appearance in exquisite detail. She rode a white horse, or possibly was carried in an opulent litter, a velvet canopy held aloft by attendants. Her gown was made of the finest brocade, woven with gold threads and adorned with jewels. Her dark Spanish hair, a contrast to the lighter Florentine complexions, was intricately styled and possibly adorned with pearls and a coronet. Her presence was one of regal bearing, a new standard for the Florentine court. She was not just a bride, she was a symbol of the Medici's newfound status. Her Spanish retinue was equally impressive. Knights in shining armor, ladies-in-waiting in rich Spanish fashions, and pages in livery processed through the streets. The sound of trumpets and drums filled the air, mixed with the cheers of the crowds. The Florentines, known for their love of spectacle, lined the streets, eager to see their new duchess. This was their first real glimpse of the ducal family taking its place at the head of the city, not as bankers, but as rulers. The procession culminated with a grand banquet and celebrations that lasted for days. The entire event was a massive undertaking, showcasing Cosimo's organizational skills and his seemingly unlimited resources. It was a conscious effort to establish a new order in Florence. The old republican traditions were being replaced by a dynastic monarchy. Eleonora's entry was a visual representation of this shift. She brought with her not just her dowry, but a new courtly etiquette, a new set of fashions, and a new sense of formal grandeur that would define the Medici ducal court for generations. This procession was more than a wedding parade. It was a declaration of intent. Cosimo I was signaling that his rule was legitimate, backed by powerful foreign alliances, and that the future of Florence was irrevocably tied to the Medici dynasty. Eleonora's entry into the city marked a pivotal moment in Florentine history, ushering in an era of stable, centralized Medici rule and transforming the city into a true ducal capital. Number 5, Francesco I de Medici and Joanna of Austria's wedding entry, 1565. By 1565, Cosimo I de Medici had been Duke of Florence for decades and was soon to become Grand Duke. His power was firmly established. To cement his legacy and elevate his dynasty further, he orchestrated a magnificent marriage for his eldest son and heir, Francesco. The bride was Joanna of Austria, the daughter of Holy Roman Emperor Ferdinand I, and sister of the reigning Emperor Maximilian II. This was an incredibly prestigious match, tying the Medici family to one of the most powerful ruling houses in Europe. The wedding entry of Joanna into Florence was designed to be an unparalleled spectacle, signaling the Medici's arrival on the grand European stage. The preparations for this event were monumental. Cosimo spared no expense. The city's leading artists and architects, including Giorgio Vasari, Vincenzo Borghini, and Giovanni Caccini, were commissioned to transform Florence into a theatrical set. The processional route, stretching from Porta al Prato to the Palazzo Pitti, was adorned with an astonishing array of temporary decorations. 7 magnificent triumphal arches were erected along the route. Each arch was a masterpiece of temporary architecture made of wood, stucco, and canvas, painted to resemble marble and adorned with intricate sculptures and allegorical paintings. These arches were dedicated to the virtues of the bride and groom, the glory of the Medici dynasty, and the greatness of Florence. For example, one arch might celebrate the Habsburg eagle and the Medici Palais intertwined, symbolizing the powerful union. Another might depict mythological figures bringing gifts to Florence. The level of detail was extraordinary, from painted bas-reliefs to life-size statues. Beyond the arches, the city was transformed. The Palazzo della Signoria, now known as Palazzo Vecchio, was given a temporary facade for the occasion, transforming its rugged stone into a classical edifice adorned with painted figures and friezes. Fountains were specially constructed to flow with wine instead of water, a lavish display of generosity and abundance. Houses along the route were draped with luxurious tapestries and banners. The air was filled with the scent of countless flowers and the buzz of anticipation from the thronging crowds. On December 16, 1565, Joanna of Austria made her grand entry. She arrived in a custom-built, elaborately decorated litter, its velvet curtains drawn back to allow the crowds to see her. She was dressed in a gown of white satin, embroidered with gold and pearls, truly a vision of imperial splendor. Her dark hair was styled with a jewel-encrusted coif. She was accompanied by a vast procession, her Austrian retinue, dressed in their distinct fashions, followed by Florentine nobility, clergy, and members of the ducal court. Knights in gleaming armor, heralds in colorful livery, and musicians playing trumpets and drums added to the overwhelming spectacle. As the procession moved through the city, Joanna passed beneath each triumphal arch. At each arch, carefully choreographed tableaux vivants, or living pictures, were performed. The actors, dressed as mythological gods, goddesses, or historical figures, would pose and speak verses of welcome and praise. Music swelled as she passed, and citizens cheered. The entire event was a carefully orchestrated propaganda machine, designed to impress not just the Florentines, but also the many foreign dignitaries and ambassadors who had come to witness the event. The day culminated with lavish banquets, balls, and theatrical performances that continued for weeks. The famous intermedi for the wedding, a series of spectacular musical interludes, would become legendary. But the entry procession itself was the primary public statement. It showcased the Medici's immense wealth, their unparalleled artistic patronage, and their successful integration into the highest echelons of European royalty. The wedding of Francesco and Joanna was a pivotal moment. It secured the Medici's ducal line with a prestigious imperial alliance, reinforcing their status as legitimate rulers. The procession served as a powerful visual testament to their newly acquired grandeur, reminding everyone that the former bankers were now true European royalty, ready to take their place among the crowned heads of the continent. Number 4. The Grand Ducal Coronation of Cosimo I, 1570. Cosimo I de Medici had already achieved remarkable feats. He had stabilized Florence after a period of turmoil, crushed his enemies, and established a strong ducal state. He had married his son into the Habsburg family, but he wanted more than just a ducal title. He yearned for the ultimate recognition to be elevated to Grand Duke, a status that would place him above other Italian dukes and closer to true European monarchs. After years of negotiation and diplomacy, Pope Pius V granted Cosimo the coveted title of Grand Duke of Tuscany in 1569. The formal coronation ceremony was held in Rome, but Cosimo orchestrated a magnificent return to Florence in 1570, effectively a grand ducal triumphal entry, to celebrate and display his new elevated status to his subjects and the world. This was not just a parade, it was a carefully constructed ritual of power designed to emphasize the divine sanction and imperial legitimacy of his rule. Cosimo was no longer just the Duke, he was the Grand Duke, a title he had worked his entire life to secure. On January 27, 1570, Cosimo made his grand entry into Florence. He was dressed in a ceremonial robes that reflected his new dignity, possibly with a newly commissioned Grand Ducal crown on his head, or carried before him as a symbol. He rode a magnificent horse, surrounded by a procession of the highest Florentine nobility, members of his court, and representatives from other Italian states. The route was meticulously planned to showcase the heart of his dominion. Its temporary structures, as was now customary for major Medici events, adorned the city. These included triumphal arches, temporary statues, and elaborate decorations that transformed streets into a grand stage. These structures were not just beautiful, they were laden with symbolism, celebrating Cosimo's wisdom, his military prowess, and the peace and prosperity he had brought to Tuscany. Painters like Alessandro Allori and sculptors like Giambologna contributed to these fleeting masterpieces. One arch might have depicted allegories of justice and good governance, while another showed Florence being protected by Cosimo's strength. The official records and descriptions from the time emphasized the precise order of the procession. There were heralds in rich livery, trumpeters, drummers, and musicians. The civic guilds, prominent families, and religious orders all played a part, demonstrating their loyalty and acknowledging Cosimo's supreme authority. Banners bearing the new Grand Ducal coat of arms, combining the Medici Pale with the double-headed eagle of the Holy Roman Empire, fluttered prominently. As Cosimo passed, crowds cheered, recognizing the significance of this new title. The procession served as a public affirmation of a shift in the political landscape. Florence was no longer just a powerful city-state. It was the capital of a grand duchy, a significant entity on the map of Europe. Cosimo's elevation was a statement that the Medici family had transitioned from influential bankers to fully recognized hereditary sovereigns. The culmination of the procession was likely at the Palazzo Pitti, Cosimo's magnificent new residence, or perhaps the Palazzo Vecchio, which now served as the official seat of the Grand Ducal court. Inside, further celebrations, banquets, and perhaps even theatrical performances would have followed. The cost of this Grand Ducal celebration, like all Medici spectacles, was immense, but for Cosimo, it was money well spent. It was an investment in his image, his legacy, and the future of his dynasty. This procession was more than just a celebration of a new title. It was a theatrical performance of absolute power, carefully staged to impress, to legitimize, and to engrave Cosimo's new status into the hearts and minds of his subjects. It solidified his place as the founder of the Grand Duchy of Tuscany and the architect of an enduring Medici reign. Number 3, Ferdinando I de' Medici and Christina of Lorraine's wedding entry, 1589. By 1589, the Grand Duchy of Tuscany was firmly established. Ferdinando I de' Medici, who had been a cardinal before unexpectedly becoming Grand Duke after his brother Francesco I's death, needed to secure the dynastic succession. He set aside his cardinal's robes and married Christina of Lorraine, a granddaughter of the formidable Catherine de' Medici, Queen of France. This marriage forged a powerful alliance with the French monarchy. The wedding celebrations were among the most extravagant in Medici history, showcasing not just wealth, but an unparalleled command of artistic innovation. The entry procession itself was a dazzling preamble to the even more famous accompanying theatrical events. Christina of Lorraine made her grand entry into Florence on April 28, 1589. Like previous ducal entries, the entire city was transformed into a series of interconnected stages. The best artists, architects, and engineers of the time, including Bernardo Buontalenti, the legendary inventor and stage designer, were enlisted to create a truly immersive experience. The processional route, from Porta al Prato to the Palazzo Pitti, was lined with temporary structures of incredible ingenuity and beauty. There were 9 magnificent triumphal arches, each more elaborate than the last. These arches were not just static decorations. They incorporated moving parts, fountains that sprayed perfumed water, and intricate machinery that brought allegorical figures to life. Records describe arches adorned with hundreds of painted canvases, sculptures of marble and stucco, and gilded ornaments that shimmered in the sunlight. Each arch presented a different theme, celebrating the virtues of the ducal couple, the glory of the Medici, or the prosperity of Tuscany. One arch might have shown Lorraine and Tuscany united by love, while another showcased the bounty of the land under Medici rule. Beyond the arches, the city itself was a stage. The Ponte Santa Trinita, a quay crossing over the Arno River, was temporarily adorned with classical statues and balustrades. Buildings along the route were draped with luxurious tapestries, often depicting mythological scenes or Medici family triumphs. The Medici coat of arms, intertwined with the lilies of France, was prominently displayed everywhere, signaling the powerful new alliance. The air was filled with the fragrance of flowers, the sound of trumpets and drums, and the excited murmur of thousands of spectators. Christina of Lorraine arrived in a magnificent state carriage pulled by a team of white horses, their harnesses adorned with jewels and gold. She wore a gown of immense luxury, possibly of French design, sparkling with diamonds and pearls, her dark hair styled with elegant precision. She was accompanied by a vast and diverse procession. There were members of the French nobility, dressed in the latest Parisian fashions, followed by Florentine courtiers in their finest silks and brocades. Knights in shining armor, standard bearers, heralds, and a multitude of pages and attendants all added to the spectacle. One of the most striking aspects of this entry was the attention to detail in the costumes and allegorical figures that accompanied the procession. For example, there were figures representing the virtues, or the rivers of Tuscany, or even specific cities of the Grand Duchy, all dressed in elaborate, historically informed attire. This added another layer of meaning and artistic depth to the visual display. As the procession moved, it paused at specific points for short musical and theatrical performances that brought the allegories on the arches to life. This blurring of the lines between parade and theater was a hallmark of Medici spectacles. The Grand Ducal couple eventually arrived at the Palazzo Pitti, where the most famous part of the celebrations would take place, the intermedi for the play La Pellegrina. These were a series of 6 stunning musical and theatrical interludes performed in the newly built Uffizi Theater, which included elaborate stage machinery, special effects, and incredible costumes. While not part of the street procession, they were an integral part of the overall wedding celebration and showcased the Medici's unparalleled patronage of the performing arts. The wedding of Ferdinando and Cristina, and especially the entry procession, was a resounding statement. It demonstrated the Medici's unwavering commitment to dynastic power, their immense wealth, and their ability to command the finest artistic and engineering talent in Europe. It celebrated a powerful new alliance with France and solidified the Grand Duchy's position as a major European power, renowned not just for its political stability, but for its dazzling cultural achievements. Number 2, Cosimo, the second de Medici and Maria Magdalena of Austria's wedding entry, 1608. By the early 17th century, the Medici Grand Dukes had firmly established their place among European royalty. Ferdinando I had secured strong alliances with France and the Holy Roman Empire. His son and heir, Cosimo II, was destined for a similarly grand match. In 1608, he married Maria Magdalena of Austria, another Habsburg princess, daughter of Archduke Charles II of Austria. This marriage reinforced the crucial Habsburg connection, providing political stability and prestige. The wedding entry of Maria Magdalena into Florence was another opportunity for the Medici to display their power, wealth, and continued commitment to spectacular public events, albeit with a slightly different emphasis on technological marvels and dramatic flair. The city prepared for months. Once again, leading artists and engineers, including Giulio Parigi, were tasked with transforming Florence into a temporary theatrical space. The processional route, from the Porta al Prato to the Palazzo Pitti, was adorned with an impressive series of temporary structures, but with a new level of sophistication. Records describe 8 elaborate triumphal arches, each more complex than those seen in previous entries. These arches were not merely painted. They often incorporated new mechanical devices, fountains that sprayed perfumed water or even wine, and intricate lighting effects to enhance the spectacle. Allegorical figures, often played by live actors in elaborate costumes, adorned the arches, performing short scenes as the procession passed. The themes celebrated the virtues of the new Grand Duchess, the prosperity of Tuscany, and the enduring power of the Medici-Habsburg alliance. One arch might have depicted a representation of fame, announcing the arrival of the illustrious bride, while another showed figures representing the 4 continents paying homage to the power of the Medici. The Ponte Santa Trinita was once again transformed, adorned with classical statues and elegant balustrades. These buildings along the route were draped with rich tapestries, many featuring mythological scenes or heroic narratives that subtly alluded to the Medici's greatness. The Grand Ducal coat of arms, a symbol of their established royalty, was prominently displayed throughout the city, intermingled with the Austrian double eagle. The air was filled with the sounds of trumpets, drums, and the general clamor of a city celebrating. Maria Magdalena made her grand entry on October 25, 1608. She was a true Habsburg princess, arriving with a vast entourage. She rode in a magnificent, custom-built state carriage, its exterior gleaming with gold and its interior lined with plush velvet. Her gown was a marvel of European court fashion, likely made of rich, dark fabric, adorned with a dazzling array of jewels, particularly diamonds. Her hair was styled in the elaborate fashions of the early 17th century, possibly with a tall, feathered headdress. The procession was incredibly diverse. Alongside the Austrian nobility in their distinctive attire, there were Florentine courtiers, knights in shining armor, pages, and a multitude of attendants. Religious orders and civic guilds also participated, showcasing the city's unified welcome. Musicians played complex fanfares and carefully synchronized salvos of cannon fire punctuated the journey. One of the unique aspects of this entry was the incorporation of more elaborate theatrical effects directly into the street parade. Figures representing different regions of Tuscany or allegories like abundance and justice would perform short mimes or deliver declamations as the carriage passed. This added a dynamic, living element to the already stunning visual display. The entry was just the beginning of weeks of festivities. These included magnificent banquets, masked balls, and the famous opera Eurydice, one of the earliest operas in history, which was performed in the Uffizi Theatre. The celebrations also included a spectacular naval battle staged on the Arno River, and a grand giostra or joust, further cementing the Medici's reputation for lavish and innovative entertainment. The wedding of Cosimo II and Maria Magdalena and its accompanying entry procession were more than just a celebration of a royal marriage. They were a powerful reaffirmation of the Medici's established position as Grand Dukes of Tuscany, their strategic alliances, and their continued patronage of the arts and sciences. It showed that even into the 17th century, the Medici understood the power of spectacle to project authority, maintain public admiration, and solidify their dynastic rule. It was a magnificent display of enduring power and prestige, a final flourish of Grand Ducal splendor in the twilight of the High Renaissance. Number 1. Ferdinando II de Medici and Vittoria della Rovera's wedding entry, 1637. By 1637, the Medici dynasty had been ruling Tuscany for over a century. Ferdinando II de Medici, the reigning Grand Duke, was a cultured and enlightened ruler, known for his scientific interests and his commitment to the arts. His marriage to Vittoria della Rovera, a princess from the Duchy of Urbino, was not just a political alliance, but also an important dynastic move. Vittoria was the last of her line, and her union with Ferdinando ensured the Medici would inherit the vast art collection and territories of Urbino. This wedding entry, though later in the Medici era, was still a testament to their enduring power and their mastery of public spectacle, albeit with a focus on refined elegance rather than overwhelming force. The city of Florence, still recovering from a devastating plague that had struck years earlier, rallied to put on a grand show. The preparations, though perhaps slightly more understated than the colossal events of the 16th century, were still meticulous. Leading artists and engineers, including Giovanni Battista Baldi, were enlisted to create the temporary decorations. The processional route from Porta al Prado to the Palazzo Pitti was once again adorned with temporary structures. While perhaps fewer in number than previous entries, these were exquisitely designed, focusing on harmony and classical proportion. Records describe elegant triumphal arches adorned with paintings, sculptures, and inscriptions that celebrated the virtues of the ducal couple and the glory of Tuscany. These structures often incorporated elements of the Della Rovere family's coat of arms, the oak tree intertwined with the Medici pallier, symbolizing the union of the two houses and the peaceful transfer of territories and treasures. The streets were cleaned and perhaps strewn with flowers, reflecting the Medici's reputation for order and prosperity. Banners bearing the Grand Ducal arms fluttered from windows, and tapestries hung from balconies, creating a festive atmosphere. The air would have been filled with the sound of musical fanfares, played by trumpeters and drummers, heralding the arrival of the distinguished procession. Vittoria della Rovere made her solemn and elegant entry into Florence on April 11th, 1637. She was a beautiful and dignified princess. She rode in a magnificent enclosed state carriage richly decorated, its glass windows allowing glimpses of the bride within. Her gown would have been a masterpiece of contemporary fashion, likely in the opulent Baroque style, with intricate embroidery, pearls, and diamonds. Her hair was styled in the popular fashions of the day, possibly adorned with delicate lace or jewels. The procession itself was grand, though perhaps less overtly military than some earlier entries. It included high-ranking Florentine nobility, members of the Grand Ducal court, and representatives from the Della Rovere family. Knights in ceremonial armor, pages in livery, and heralds in colorful attire accompanied the carriage, adding to the visual splendor. The emphasis was on the dignity and grace of the ducal couple and the harmonious union of their families. As the procession moved through the city, it passed beneath the temporary arches, where carefully composed tableaux vivants or musical performances might have briefly unfolded. The overall impression was one of refined grandeur, a testament to a dynasty that had matured into undisputed sovereignty. The entry was followed by a series of celebrations that lasted for weeks. These included formal banquets, masked balls, and court spectacles. While the theatrical intermedi of earlier weddings were not replicated on the same scale, the court still entertained with music, dance, and perhaps smaller, more intimate theatrical performances. The wedding of Ferdinando II and Vittoria della Rovere, and especially the entry procession, served several purposes. It publicly celebrated a crucial dynastic alliance, one that significantly enriched the Medici art collections and expanded their territorial influence. It demonstrated the enduring stability and prestige of the Grand Duchy of Tuscany, even in a century marked by war and plague elsewhere in Europe. It was a testament to the Medici's ability to maintain their power and legacy through carefully orchestrated public displays, reminding all observers that even in the changing world of the 17th century, the Grand Dukes of Florence continued to command respect and awe.